Hello and welcome back to the Cfctalk podcast. I'm your host, Mohammed Splitted, joined by one of the most special guests you could have in a transfer window. Ben, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast. If you guys don't know who Ben is, he's the host of CBS Sports, a fantastic writer who has worked with many brilliant players and sports personnel in the past as well. Ben, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, transfer window and Chelsea fans. I think these two words, and you could summarize how a Chelsea fan feels.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer window is always exciting, but also a little bit terrifying when you see your rivals sign a player you want or other clubs move a little bit faster. And I think every fan base somehow thinks that they're unique. But from the perspective of Chelsea, it's a case of a new era and new faces needed. But Arsenal fans, obviously, even though they're likely to move quite fast in this window, have been notoriously disappointed by the windows. So unless you're really a Liverpool or a Manchester City fan who have been pretty consistently decisive in windows and got their targets, I think most fans enter this period 50% feeling like it's Christmas and 50% fearful that it's somehow going to be a disaster for their football club. And that's the kind of beauty of a transfer window. It's both exciting and unpredictable.
Yeah, I think it's fearful for Chelsea fans at the moment is because every day we wake up to being linked with a new player and we've suddenly forgotten, all the other links from the past, and we're nicknamed Interested FC at the moment, and that's what's happening because every now and then we just see news about Chelsea being interested with player X, player Y, player Z, but never a bid, never nothing more than that. But before we get into the transfer window, just a quick word on Bruce Buck and Marina leaving Chelsea right now. I think it was kind of expected when the whole news of Roman having to sell the club happened. But is it too soon for Chelsea to make these replacements? Because as we all know, Marina's been in charge of Chelsea for a long time now, and she's brought in some incredible transfers and handled the club really well under Roman Abramovich.
Marina's the most interesting departure for sure. And I understand why the fan base might be a little bit worried and feel that departure is sudden. And you sort of have to separate Buck and Marina. So if we start with Marina, far more of a two-way conversation because Boehly came in with huge admiration for her. And they also were well aware of her importance at the football club. And yet she had input, and it was unclear in the takeover process with all suitors whether she wished to stay or felt that with Abramovich going, she would leave too. And it's a mixture really of Boehly having one strategy and also Marina feeling like she wants to leave the football club due to her association with the old regime under Roman Abramovich. But ultimately, that's not of huge concern because first of all, football clubs are working multiple windows ahead usually. And second of all, there has been a transitional period and there'll continue to be a handover. So it's not like she just departs and then Todd Boehly has to run everything. Obviously, and it's the same with Buck staying on as a special advisor, the Boehly group are not going to just let her exit the football club without a proper handover. And there's plenty of other football staff, including Petr Cech, for example, that at the moment are still remaining as well. And I think the other thing to bear in mind with not just Marina, but anybody that takes on that role around transfers and recruitment, you tend to find, and Dan Ashworth from Brighton to Newcastle is another good example of this, that the protocol is to get rid of them quickly and put them on gardening leave. And the reason for that is because the longer they stay at the football club when they're outgoing, the more they know. And the sense of football clubs tends to be that you want to get them on gardening leave quickly because of that first point I made, that football clubs are working multiple windows ahead. And it's not really insider knowledge if you ask Marina to complete a window and allocate any targets going forwards. If she then hypothetically, not that I think this is a realistic scenario, but if she went to Arsenal, for example, she would know stuff about Chelsea, not because she was trying to cheat or was trying to bend the rules, but the longer you stay at that football club during a transitional period, if you do join a rival, the more naturally you know about Chelsea's players, about wage structures, about new ownership plans, and about future windows. And that can be helpful in your new role, which is why you tend to be placed on gardening leave relatively quickly. And I think that's why once Chelsea officially announced the departure, you'll realize that she gets placed on a gardening leave or departs the football club very quickly. But no real cause for concern. And I think that due to her own input and involvement in the transitional period, Chelsea are fine for this window. And then by the time the next window comes, they'll obviously want a replacement in place, and names are certainly being looked at. With Buck, it was a bit more straightforward because the new ownership group had Todd Boehly in mind as chair pretty much from the very beginning. And the only reason why there was confusion over that departure as to whether Buck would or wouldn't stay is because they wanted to come in, assess the football club, have a transitional period, allow Buck to pitch his own case, and then decide. But there's also an element of gamesmanship to that, because you can't bid for Chelsea Football Club knowing that Marina and Buck are two influential figures in the process and say you won't have a job. And the Sir Martin Broughton bid had a chair in mind, and that was seen to be a sticking point because there's no doubt that Bruce Buck wanted to stay in his role. So what you sort of have to do is play the game and bid for the football club and say that everyone's job will be assessed, then come in. And then if you are going to get rid of them, you do that after you've already won, because then you've got the control and the ability to hire and fire. But I've said from as early really as May, before even the new ownership group were formally in place, that Todd Boehly saw himself as the next Chelsea Football Club chair. And that will be the case. And he'll be flanked by Jonathan Goldstein. So you'll have a situation where Boehly is the chair and has operational control. And don't at all be surprised if he either gives up other opportunities or spends a lot more time in London. So he has that hands-on ability. But flanking him in Jonathan Goldstein is a day-to-day London-based presence. And between the two of them, they'll make sure that they're as hands-on and proactive as possible. So I think that Chelsea are in very good hands. And I understand why the fan base feel that lots of departures are happening and not that many arrivals, and that Boehly has sort of got a lot of responsibility in different areas. And the fan base naturally want to know where his experience lies, especially if they think that he's negotiating transfers. But my understanding remains that the group at large, and Boehly and Goldstein in particular, are going to be very hands-on and very proactive, and will continue to lean upon people like Buck and Marina before they depart to make sure that there's no holes when senior executives leave. And then over the course of the coming weeks and months, obviously replacements will be found.
I think, am I wrong in saying this might be a step into what Chelsea reported, or not Chelsea, but news channels reported back in May about, Todd Boehly being interested adding ex-Chelsea players to the board, adding more hands-on personnel, like I guess, Petr Cech was there during the Roman era, maybe having another ex-Chelsea player sit at the board like they have at Ajax and Bayern Munich, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, I think that the ownership structure and therefore the board structure will change dramatically comparative to Roman Abramovich, where you had a very successful owner over decades, but not particularly transparent or open, and there wasn't a huge amount of engagement. And the same can be said for Bruce Buck, a very influential figure, not just at Chelsea Football Club, but within the Premier League as well, but not particularly collaborative, and within Chelsea, very much polarized opinions. And now you have sort of shared responsibilities at the football club, where Boehly is in charge of the operational side. Clearlake are going to be heavily invested on the financial, the football, the business side, and the global growth of the brand. Jonathan Goldstein will lead on the redevelopment. Hans-Jörg Weiss is going to be a little bit more distant, but still very much involved when investment opportunities come to the fore, and so on. So then that bleeds into the board, which it's too early to speak that specifically on, but we know already that Clearlake Boehly will have multiple spots, and Bedag Eghbali in particular will be relatively hands-on. And then I do agree with you that I think you'll find that ex-Chelsea players or those that have an affinity with the football club will be involved, at least on a non-executive level. It may be that a fan group or somebody will be given a sort of golden share on behalf of the fan base to protect the kind of heritage side and so on. And all of that will be discussed. And I think that's the key point of differentiation. The Chelsea fan right now will want to know who's on the board, what's the makeup, when's it going to be announced, who's going, who's staying, and are there experts in each area of the football club to make sure that Chelsea can maintain their success on the football field and grow off it? And the short answer is yes. It's a very non-ego based group who are prepared to delegate and listen to different voices, whether officially through the board or unofficially through the fan base. So that tells you that, unlike under Abramovich, this is a more transparent ownership group willing to engage. And then as far as the specifics are concerned, the reason we don't know them at the moment is because they've only been in the job officially 3 weeks, but also because they want to reach out. They want to hear who's available. They want to talk to ex-players. They want to speak to fan groups so they know what's right. And that's a better approach, because if tomorrow you announce someone on the board that's an ex-Chelsea player, you'll win a lot of love. You'll win a lot of social media clicks. But a better approach is to speak to 20 ex-Chelsea players and work out who is the right ambassador, who's got the right level of seniority, who's got the right business acumen to actually be a success in the long term. And I think that's why they're taking their time. And during that process of taking their time and listening to different people and essentially trying to walk first, run second, there may be some frustration. Certain people in the fan base may lose their patience and wonder why there's not more progress, especially with the window open and other clubs moving fast. But I think judge the ownership group, the board makeup, the strategy, the plans at the end of the transfer window, even if as a fan that means biting your lip and waiting and seeing and panicking first. Judge them at the end of the window. And if that means going off social media, not looking at all the interested in this, not looking at all the nearly transfers and so on, just taking a breath and judging Chelsea Football Club come either the first kick of a ball or the end of the window. And then at that point, the board will be clear, the strategy will be clear, and the new signings will have come in and the outgoings will have been resolved. And that's when the clear late Boehly era can really start.
I think you're absolutely right, because with a lot of these clubs making these transfers early on in the window, talks must have been going back all the way from January, whereas Chelsea were not able to make those contacts with players because of the uncertainty of the future that they had and the sanctions that were placed back in March, I believe. So as Chelsea fans, we just need to be patient, as you said, and just, you know, there's still quite a long way to go. There's all of July and almost all of August. Even when the first ball is kicked into the Premier League season, we're still going to have 2 or 3 weeks, I believe, after the Premier League starts. But then heading straight into the transfers, a lot of news coming out this week about Chelsea, especially with Raheem Sterling and his interest, or Tuchel's interest in Raheem Sterling. We all know he's an experienced winner at Manchester City. He's won everything except the greatest prize in football, in European football, the Champions League. Is it the right call to pay what Man City are asking, which at the moment seems to be around £50 million for Raheem Sterling, and bring him at Chelsea and you know, in a team which already has an influx of wingers, is what I believe, with Pulisic being there, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Hakim Ziyech, Werner being able to play in that position. And we know the way Chelsea play, Mount always takes up one of those spots with, you know, a striker in there. So is it the right choice for Tuchel?
Well, I think that Chelsea need goals. That's the first thing to say. And let's not forget that whether it's 60 million, 50 million or 35 million, which seems to be the relatively low starting fee, though there may well be add-ons that take that a lot higher. But whatever you pay for Sterling, you're getting a 27-year-old with proven experience. And even last season, where people perhaps felt that he wasn't playing as often, his total games was 47 comparative to 49 the season before and early 50s the 2 seasons before that. So he's equally as integral over the last 4 seasons at Manchester City, and his goal output remains relatively high. It's not quite where it was in 1920, where I think he scored 31 goals in all competitions, but he still scored 17 goals and 13 in the Premier League. And those 13 goals or more, 15, 20, make a big difference as far as Chelsea.
It's a lot higher than, I know I'm cutting you off, I'm sorry about that, but it's a lot higher than any of the wingers that we've currently got at the club. And it's way higher, which is quite, as a Chelsea fan, it does seem like it's the right move.
Yeah, I mean, he's given a fair amount of freedom and he's played in a lot of different roles at Manchester City. So he'll get goals because he's encouraged to play centrally and cut into the box, whereas perhaps some of Chelsea's wingers are asked to stick wider and provide a few more assists. But in Sterling, you get that versatility, and it would be up to Thomas Tuchel to work out how he would be played in the system and alongside whom. And then as far as other wingers are concerned, I think it's fair to say that if Sterling was to come in, one of the wide players that you mentioned would have to leave the football club, and Chelsea are quite prepared to do that. So Sterling makes a lot of sense because you fill a goal void and you therefore replace the goals that the departing Lukaku, even though there were only 8 in the Premier League, got last season. You get a 27-year-old who's right at his peak, and you have a focal point that can hopefully help Chelsea close the gap between where they are now and Liverpool and Manchester City. So the challenge with Sterling at the moment is twofold. One, that he hasn't actually made his mind up what he wants to do, and 2, negotiating a fee with Manchester City. And I think that Manchester City are highly likely to want the same fee as a minimum that they get for Gabriel Jesus, which is likely to be in the early 40 millions, or maybe even as high as 45 million, and still potentially add-ons on top. So whether it ends up being the 60 million price tag that Manchester City started asking for, or down to 50 million, or a little bit lower, they'll still have that outlay because there'll be add-ons on top of that. And those add-ons may not all need to be paid. Manchester City could turn around and say, well, if you go on and qualify for the Champions League, we want 5 million. And then in all likelihood, Chelsea would have to pay that. But they could say, if Sterling scores you 15 Premier League goals, we want 7 million. Or they could even offset the fact that if Chelsea win the Premier League at the expense of Manchester City with Sterling scoring goals, they want 15 million. It is unclear at this stage. And that is just normal and part of a negotiation process. But I think as a bare minimum, the outlay for Sterling will be the same as the outlay for Jesus. And I think as a combination, Manchester City want at least 90 million for both players. Otherwise, they're not prepared to entertain talks. And right now, I think that Chelsea's position, which you'd expect as a starting position because there is gamesmanship to it, is, hang on a minute, if Sadio Mane goes to Bayern Munich for more like 35, then how is it that Raheem Sterling, with his contract running down, is a 60 million player? And somewhere down the line, they'll compromise. But I think that there is a willingness from both clubs to negotiate this deal. Sterling is quite prepared to move to London. He knows at Chelsea that he's got Champions League football. So this is a transfer that's looking more and more likely, but Sterling still hasn't made up his mind. So there's work to be done. There's a fee to be agreed, and then there is negotiation with the player himself. So this isn't something that is going to be imminent in the next few days or week. But as we get into early July and pre-season starts, then I think Chelsea see themselves as the front runners for this particular deal.
With the uprise in the interest in Sterling and all the news coming out of Tuchel's interest in him, we've kind of seen the Dembele news that was coming in in the early weeks of the transfer window kind of low down, and we haven't heard much about Dembele. The only thing that I've heard so far is the fact that he hasn't been in contact with Barcelona, and it doesn't seem like he wants to stay at Barcelona. But at the same time, there hasn't been significant progress outside of Barcelona with him as well. So, is he in a sticky situation, or will Chelsea go after Dembele once this Sterling kind of is wrapped? The Sterling situation is wrapped up.
Well, I think the first thing to say when a fan hears of a deal go quiet is that it isn't Championship Manager where you make a bid and then you expect to see some kind of update. or progress or answer. A player may be delaying because they're waiting for another offer. They may be delaying because they've agreed multiple deals with various clubs. And this is just part of the negotiation process. So before I come on to Dembele, if I'm the player, why wouldn't I agree a deal with Chelsea and Arsenal? And if I want to go to Chelsea, why wouldn't I agree the deal with Arsenal so I can get more from Chelsea? And similarly, you might agree the deal with the player, which is the case with Chelsea and Jules Koundé on a 5-year deal, but you've still got to agree the deal with Sevilla. And there'll be twists and turns, and you making an offer might prompt another club to put in an offer, or the player may just say, I want a holiday, I'm going to go away and think. And all of these things can slow things down and complicate them, but they're a perfectly normal part of the process. So when somebody says a deal has gone dead, it's never true, because Dembele may be buying his time. He may be blanking either Barcelona or Chelsea whilst his agents try and finally get PSG to come in with an offer. And clubs will always be played, and they'll always play the situation. And players similarly will always play one club to get the best possible deal out of another. And this is totally normal. And most of us will have done it in our lives, where you get a job offer and you go back to your existing employer and you say, I've got another job offer, but I'd like to stay with you. Can I have a pay rise? And vice versa. You may have an extension or an offer from your employer, but you may be looking out there in the market and you may say, well, I want to join you, but my new employer's offered me $5,000 more. Can you match it? And exactly the same thing effectively happens in the transfer market. So don't read too much into lulls, because what goes on privately and is unknown is often more important. And with all that said, with Dembele, the situation is this. At the time of speaking, he has one offer on the table from Barcelona. It's been there for a while. Barcelona don't want to up it. And in truth, they can't afford to at the moment unless they get rid of some players and create some extra finances on their wage bill. So that is where we stand there. And Dembele has sort of blanked Barcelona. And if you talk to the Dembele camp, they're frustrated with Barcelona because he had a great back end of the season where he played regularly and got a ton of assists. And to be honest, was perfect in Xavi's system, which is why he wants to keep the player. And yet nothing has been increased on that offer. And that's why Dembele is frustrated. And Barcelona feel they've made a very competitive offer and Dembele is not engaging with them. And that's why Barcelona are frustrated. And then Thomas Tuchel made it clear to Todd Boehly that he wants to be reunited with Dembele and he feels he can get the best out of the player. But no wage has been agreed. No terms have been agreed yet. There are some reports out there that says within the conversations, the informal ones and with the agent, there have been guarantees given that Dembele would be the spine of a Chelsea team and would not be rotated. And there may be some truth to that, but you're obviously going to tell the player that before he joins. And then once he's joined, a lot of it is just contingent on form and how well he settles and on the tactics that are used. But nothing has been formally agreed yet between Dembele and Chelsea. And then PSG are denying that anything is advanced or that they're even going to make an offer. So right now, Dembele only has one option, which is re-sign with Barcelona. And Barcelona know that and therefore will not increase the offer yet because they can just let the clock tick. And then Dembele is in big trouble potentially because he wants big wages. There's not many clubs that can afford him. If no one else comes in, he risks his contract just getting run down and potentially not having a club. And Barcelona feel like they've got all the cards. So I think there's two scenarios here. Scenario number one is he just signs with Barcelona. Scenario number two is Chelsea formally enter the mix. And then it gets interesting because he'll either pick Chelsea or Barcelona will have to up their offer because there's another suitor in the mix. And then we'll find out whether Dembele really wants to stay at Barcelona or is actually holding out for the Chelsea move. But there's only really two options at the moment, unless he just ends up clubless. One is he signs at Barcelona. Two is effectively Chelsea and Barcelona end up in a terms war to try and make Dembele the best offer. And then you'll actually determine if he prefers to stay at Barcelona or move to Chelsea. I think if Chelsea make an offer at this point, it's 70-30 in Chelsea's favour. But they haven't made an offer yet, which is why Barcelona remain confident of keeping him and keeping him on the terms that they want to offer him right now, rather than having to dig into their back pocket and find any more money.
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting situation with Dembele and Chelsea, and with everything that's been going on surrounding Dembele coming to Chelsea and the offers being made. With that, the big news of Jonathan Klaus being targeted by Chelsea and being eyed as a perfect replacement for Azpilicueta, who does seem like is bound to leave for Barcelona or is bound for a Chelsea exit at the moment. For 10 million pounds, almost feels like a great steal for Chelsea. And someone like Azpilicueta who's been so consistent at that right back position, and with Reece James coming in, Klaus being that perfect replacement. What are your thoughts on that, and if that deal's gonna actually go through, or is it just one of those rumors?
Well, the first thing again to say on this, and I think it nicely complements your first question, is that Chelsea have been monitoring Klaus for the best part of a year. So should that signing materialize, it's not a scramble to replace Azpilicueta. It's not a new ownership group signing in the same way that Jules Koundé predates Clear Lake Boehly. So if they get it over the line, it's all part of the old regime's plans. And therefore, this is something that Marina will have had a big say in. And the beauty of Klaus is that, as you rightly say, he's a wing back that can fill the void should Azpilicueta go, and a bargain price because the 29-year-old has only got, I believe, a year left on the contract. And that certainly allows Chelsea to get a steal as far as the finances are concerned. And the situation with Klaus, I don't think will be resolved before the situation with Azpilicueta is finalized. And that's probably what's frustrating Chelsea fans at the moment, that they're seeing Azpilicueta, Alonso, obviously Rudiger historically, but that's now resolved, Lukaku, and time and effort is being made to clear out first. And that's really where the sanctions coupled with the sale have hit Chelsea the hardest, that they would have been able to do all of this whilst football was still continuing and know where they stand with each of these names. But instead, they're having to come in and speak to players and work out who might be susceptible to staying on and who definitely wants to leave. So nothing has particularly advanced with Klaus, but Chelsea have realised that he is a good fit for the football club, and it gives them a much needed right back. The danger with something like this, if you don't move decisively, is that at that price, there will be plenty of other clubs interested. And I'm aware of Atletico Madrid being one suitor that are also tracking his services as well. So Klaus will go this summer. There's no denying that. And I think that Lens know that and have resigned themselves to that. And they certainly want some money rather than no money. And Chelsea are in the mix. And as far as I'm aware, anyway, they've already made contact with the players' sort of entourage and the agent. And it won't be particularly hard to negotiate a price on this one. It's not a difficult negotiation like it is with Jules Koundé and Sevilla, simply because of the time left on the contract and the fact that, as I say, Lens want the money rather than trying to keep the player and let the value go down by January. So Chelsea are in the mix here, but like I say, nothing has advanced at this stage, but he's a very, very good player at a bargain price.
Yeah, I think for me as a Chelsea fan, I see that deal as a no-brainer. I think it's one of those transfers which are required by Chelsea, whether because Azpilicueta leaves this season or not. Or even if you look at it in a sense of where Azpilicueta isn't able to play every single game this season, and we've been playing with a three at the back, and as things stands with Christensen and Rudiger gone, we really need to start targeting Koundé, and we really need to make those deals, in my opinion at least, finished off or put up a great stand, in front of the clubs and say, look, we're here, we want this player, and we want to get them at the club as soon as possible. We're not going to wait for the last day, because as things stands, Chelsea do not have defenders to go into the next season and play the season out.
Yeah, I mean, the centre-back is a key priority, because you start looking at who's going to be alongside Silva, and it's worrying from a Chelsea fan perspective. And obviously, if Azpilicueta goes, then a wing-back or a right-back specifically would be needed as well. And Chelsea's main priority is that defensive area. But the signings needed throughout the spine of the team, the centre-back, the right-back, the keeper situation, even though that won't seem urgent from a fan's perspective. Kepa, I don't think, is just going to sit there and want to be a number 2. And should somebody come in for Kepa or he choose to depart, then another goalkeeper is needed. And Chelsea are looking at young goalkeepers and just experienced number 2s to see what they can do there. Central midfield will need some bolstering, especially as the futures of Kante and Jorginho are determined. But even if they stay, I think there's a worry that they're not going to be as integral or at their peak as they have been in previous seasons. And then with Lukaku wanting the move to Inter, and that will now happen. There's only a few kind of final negotiations, but sources from both sides have said over the last few days that it is a case of will happen rather than if it happens. So suddenly you need a goal scorer as well. And therefore, when you look at who Chelsea would like to bring in, whether they're depth signings or marquee signings, goalkeeper, centre-back, right-back, central midfielder, they're looking at wide players like Sterling, and they need a focal point, a main goal scorer, which is why Gabriel Jesus was being mentioned as well. That's 5 or 6 signings all throughout the spine of a team in different positions. And not all of them will necessarily be signings that Chelsea don't have cover for, and not every single one of them will be a start every game signing. But, when you look at where the most critical of all of them are, it is still in the defensive area, because at least if you look in midfield, Jorginho and Kante are there. At least if you look in the wide areas, there is a Ziyech and a Pulisic and a Werner, and there are goal scorers at the football club, and Lukaku hasn't actually gone yet. So defense is the number 1 priority, but you could make an argument that pretty much every single area of the field needs strengthening, unfortunately. And that's why I think that if you judge Chelsea Football Club at the end of the window rather than now, I think it will prove to have been a very busy and productive window with at least 4 or 5 incomings.
Talking about the situation up front with the strikers, Lukaku leaving, you would think Chelsea really need a backup striker, and that's why they're targeting Gabriel Jesus. However, the reports that have come out in the last few days are Arsenal are looking the most likely team to sign Gabriel Jesus by the end of this transfer window. And with Chelsea not having a lot of options in that, you would expect a team like Chelsea to maybe call back, Armando Broja, use him for the next season. However, not call back, actually, he was to come back because it was a loan. But the reports that we're hearing about him going to West Ham for around 25 to 30 million, and even talks of him being, a roadway to Declan Rice coming to Chelsea by the end of this transfer window. Do you think this is the right choice by Chelsea? Because as a Chelsea fan, I'm confused myself, because I want Declan Rice at almost any cost, not the high cost of what West Ham are asking, but at the same time, I don't want to lose someone like Armando Broja at a time where Werner isn't performing the way he should be, scoring 20 odd goals, and with Lukaku leaving, we're not going to be left with many options, and Havertz not being a natural striker, however, has performed well in that position.
Yeah, I mean, the situation with Rice should be separated, because West Ham are still staunchly against selling pretty much for any price unless someone comes in with an astronomical offer. So to think that Broja could be the difference between getting Rice and not getting Rice is a little bit of a stretch. And I think that that will be very much a straight transfer if West Ham choose to pursue it. And then with Rice, I still don't think he's available in this window regardless. And somebody would have to make an astronomical offer of upwards of 120 million, in my opinion, before West Ham even consider. And even when those kind of figures have been bandied around, West Ham sources continue to just say not for sale. And I think they may be doing a very similar tactic to my club with Riyad Mahrez when he thought that he was going to join Chelsea, and he left the Algeria training camp in a January window, and his people said he was off to Stamford Bridge, and yet Leicester just held firm and said, no, I don't care what anyone offers, we're keeping him. And then obviously Mahrez ended up having to play for Leicester for a bit longer and went to Manchester City. So don't be surprised if West Ham pull a similar tactic, and regardless of rumours that you hear, Rice is just not available. And then with Broja, my understanding has been very consistent from Chelsea sources, long even before Clearlake Boehly came in. And that's that Thomas Tuchel was very impressed by what he did in the loan spell at Southampton and wants to at least assess him during pre-season. And if a ready-made replacement for Lukaku isn't available quickly, then it's not in Chelsea's interest to let Broja go, because he might be the kind of player that Chelsea want to start the season with, even if he doesn't end up in the starting 11. Certainly a player that you can bring on and might be able to get you goals and win you points from the bench. And because he's so young, if Tuchel is impressed with him in pre-season, why sell him when you could loan him out again? But this is another aspect of a transfer window that maybe fans don't consider, and that is the personal toll on a young footballer that doesn't know his future and keeps getting loaned out. And, you know, Broja is only 20 years of age, turns 21 in September. He's already been at Vitesse and then Southampton. So if he gets loaned out another time, that's 3 loans before the age of 21. And he may turn around and say, well, you know, I had a good output in the Premier League. He'll be well aware that Chelsea have got a habit of just sending out players on loan. And he could turn around and say, I just want a permanent move. And then Chelsea have got a decision to make. And I think that, again, is why Thomas Tuchel, especially as he gets more control over transfers, is going to want to look at the player and understand not just the footballer, but the personality before determining what the right approach is. Could Tuchel persuade Broja to do another 6 months out somewhere on loan by selling him the wider Chelsea vision? Or is Tuchel going to look at Broja plus any other potential incomings in that area and say, I think he's surplus to requirement, let's just cash in? And I don't think Chelsea know yet. And then from West Ham's perspective, it's all very well saying he's a top target, and that may well be the case in terms of the admiration coming from David Moyes, but there's been no offer, there's been no formal bid. So this isn't something that's just going to happen in the next week or so. There's no rigid valuation yet that Chelsea have agreed on that they will just sell Broja for, even though 30 million might be the valuation and could have been discussed. Before it gets to the point of Chelsea accepting that kind of offer from a West Ham or another club that may be interested, Napoli are in the mix as well, for example. The first stage is in Tuchel assessing Broja, talking to Broja, understanding it from his perspective as well. And then at that point, a decision will be made on his future. So a transfer to West Ham is not imminent. And you may hear at the West Ham end them saying they're the front runners, and they definitely have him on a short list. But Chelsea are going to keep control of how this pans out.
Yeah, because as a Chelsea fan, I don't want Broja to go anywhere without, you know, Tuchel making sure that he's 100% certain about letting him go. This might just be a personal opinion, and I don't know how many fans out there have this opinion, but we are a club who likes to splash out money and get the big names in. And sometimes in that process, we risk, you know, giving out our academy talents for the price that, you know, might not be the best price. And we've seen that in recent years. And it goes, you know, from the 2020 transfer window, we've spent almost 350 million pounds on players. And when I look at those players or the names that have come in, except one or two, I look at it and I say, have we really spent money in the right areas? Because none of these players, granted, yes, they're young, yes, we'll get quite a lot of this value back when they perform for us, and then when they leave the club. It is just confusing to me that we bring in these multi-million-dollar defenders while we sell out Tomori. We bring in these strikers for 100 million while we're, or at least there are rumors about planning on selling Broha. And then we bring in someone like Pulisic thinking he's the next Hazard, but then we're also still linked with Sterling and Dembele coming in. So are Chelsea rushing into this, and they might need to reassess and evaluate their transfer business strategy under this new ownership?
The transfer business strategy will certainly be reevaluated, and the big spending that you mentioned was a trait of Abramovich, and that's because it was a more cutthroat ownership. Cutthroat is usually seen to be a little bit derogatory when you kind of hire and fire, but it can also be very maverick and decisive, and those are words as far as Abramovich's financials that were definitely part of the strategy. Spend big, spend quickly, bring in a high volume of different players to suit different managers, and then if the manager moves on, you get a lot of parts that don't fit. Whereas I think that the transfers now, even though Thomas Tuchel will have a lot of say and control, will be a bit more collaborative, as exemplified by the fact that Todd Boehly is stepping in and leading on the Lukaku negotiations. But it's also about making sure that regardless of what you spend, it's part of a strategy, whether that's a football strategy or a business strategy. So when it's part of a football strategy, it's a fit for the manager. But when it's part of a business strategy, it means if the manager changes, the player fits into the style of the football club, or the player has pathways to go elsewhere. And if the player succeeds, they give you two options, one being integral to the football club, one being you can sell them on. And if the player fails or doesn't fit, you again get value because they're young enough to get your money back or better, or you've got relationships with other clubs that you can farm them out to. So that's obviously the case with the City Group as well. And Chelsea's problem has always been that there's never the pathways there. So Danny Drinkwater's a good example, didn't really work out, and then career got lost. Steve Sidwell's a good example, excellent for Reading in the Premier League, never really got a consistent run in the Chelsea team. So it's all very well when it works out, then nobody talks about the money spent, or nobody sort of questions whether too many players in the same positions were signed, or the rotation policy wasn't right, or the man management on the football side didn't kind of motivate players to be part of that rotational system. No one kind of flags that. But when it doesn't work out, the over depth in the squad, or the overspending in the squad, or players of the wrong mentalities, or players of the wrong ages, it all kind of gets exposed. And Lukaku, unfortunately, is a good example of that. So I think that Todd Boehly in particular is about a culture, and that will benefit the football side, but it will also benefit the dressing room and the football club at large, because those that come in will be the right fit, not just as footballers, but as personalities as well.
Yeah, I agree, because I've when I started watching Chelsea and until this new ownership, I've always seen Chelsea operate under the under kind of a fear of Roman Abramovich, and that fear being, if you're not successful in one season, you're out the door. You're going to look at the exit door, and you're going to be leaving the next season, whether you're a manager, you're a player, or any personnel at Chelsea. And that's how we've kind of operated under Roman Abramovich. And that has, I know I criticize it right now, but that has worked to a certain extent. We've gotten more trophies than any other club in the last 10, 15 years. Under Roman Abramovich, we were transformed as a club. And so I do only want to criticize the fact that sometimes it's better to take a back seat and reevaluate everything. And that's what I think Liverpool and Man City have done with, them sticking with Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. And that would not have happened with Chelsea. Yes, Guardiola has struggled to win the Champions League, but not once have we heard rumors about Man City thinking to go somewhere else, thinking that we need a new manager or a new structure or a new style or anything. But if it was a Chelsea, if this was Chelsea, we would have been gone with the manager, and we would have gone with any other option out there. And that's what I want to see under this new ownership, and I want to see a trust in Tuchel. We thought Roman was going to do that with Frank Lampard when we had that rebuild season under him, when we got top 4 and we got Champions League qualification next year, and it was a transfer ban as well. So as a club and as fans, we felt like maybe this is a new direction. Maybe Roman's going to give him another few years if we even don't win trophies on a regular basis. But if we can build a team like Man City have done, we could achieve big heights and compete for every single title or every competition that we play in. I know it's time for you to go, and I just want to say a very big thank you for giving us your time and having a chat with me on the podcast. It was great having you on it, and good luck for the transfer window and all the news. If a bit of a personal question, but how many hours at night do you sleep peacefully, I should ask?
Well, I mean, obviously, the thing to understand about CBS, where I'm a staff reporter, is that we're not only transfers. So it's always nice to engage with the fan base and keep across as many as you can. And some are more priority because maybe they've got an American angle. But generally speaking, I like to kind of focus on the things that you can put a bit more substance behind. So the business of sport, takeovers, the finances behind a deal, what you're not doing comparative, certainly to other journalists that make more of a day-to-day or a specialist of it, is always trying to chase every single transfer at every club. So I will focus on Chelsea. Why? Because they are an American-led ownership group. I will focus on a Lewandowski or a Tchouaméni, and again, marquee signings, Darwin Nunez, because there's kind of global appeal, Erling Haaland. But that doesn't mean that you need to not get any sleep and make 100 calls on every single player at every single club at every single level. And I think sometimes a fan might say, well, why are you not across my club? Why are you not across my transfer? And it'd be nice to be, but it's not humanly possible unless there were 10 of me. And trust me, nobody would want 10 of me. One is definitely enough. So you try to tell more of a story and not get sucked into the gossip. Certain outlets will be day to day. So they'll be able to bring you a blow by blow update, which 50% of fans love and 50% of fans hate. And, the more blow by blow you give, the more U-turns you'll see, the more twists you'll see. So what I like to try and do is offer insight rather than a blow by blow. I don't believe in saying, today PSG spoke to a player, the day after Chelsea spoke to a player, they're talking about 100,000, but the player wants 1,001. And now Arsenal have come in, and now Chelsea are panicking, and now Chelsea are the front runners. Because otherwise what you get is a sort of inconsistency that gives everyone a headache. Now, it can all be true because that's how the transfer window works. It's unpredictable. There are U-turns, there is chaos. A player will agree a deal with 3 different clubs. A player like Lewandowski will agree a deal with Barcelona, but the finances might not get him that move. And then Chelsea suddenly might sneak up, and you never know. But I think the point about the window is it doesn't have to just be told in terms of gossip. It can be told in terms of insight, so fans can better understand the process. So therefore, suddenly, as a fan, you realize that maybe a player will agree 2 different deals, which was the case with Mbappe. He literally agreed a deal with PSG, a deal with Real Madrid, and then said, I'll let you know where I'm going to. Christian Eriksen will probably be the same. You can also get into the head of the player a little bit and say, well, we don't know where Eriksen is going, but what we do know is that he'd like to stay in London if at all humanly possible. You can get a sense of what kind of wages a player is on and what he would want. And then you can start to look a little bit at the pitching process. So who's involved in actually recruiting a player? At Chelsea, Todd Boehly is going to be very hands-on with negotiation, but Thomas Tuchel and Emma Hayes are going to be very much selling the Chelsea team and strategy directly. And Jurgen Klopp is exactly the same at Liverpool, for example, whereas actually Pep Guardiola does a little bit less of that. And the first point of contact goes through scouts and strategists and directors of football, and they spend months and months and months visiting and getting to know the family and attending games long before the manager comes in. And all of this is probably quite unknown to fans. And the reason for that is because, in essence, a scout, if that's the approach to lure in a player, will want to be as secretive as they possibly can, because the last thing you want to do is announce it or make it known early, especially if a window isn't open. Otherwise, other suitors may realize, and that can change the dynamic of a deal. And I think, again, that doesn't tell you, which a fan ultimately wants to know, is Dembele joining or not? Is Lukaku leaving or not? So you can get accused of sort of being a bit waffly, and I certainly fall into that category. But I think you've got two choices during this window, and I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong. You either want the daily, and then you risk thinking something's done and it isn't, or hoping something's done and then realizing that there's a late twist. But that's the nature of the window. There's always going to be U-turns. There's always going to be things that change. Or you can try and understand the process and sleep a bit better at night, but then you have to be a bit more patient. And I sort of take the latter approach with how I try to give my stories, and I'm a bit more selective over which players and which transfers I speak around as a consequence, because I want to be able to give you that insight. And that is how you choose to consume the window. But luckily for me, compared to Fabrizio, who's a great guy and works with us at CBS, he will get no sleep and need 10 phones, whereas I'm in bed at 11 o'clock at night. And if Chelsea choose to release a statement at 1 in the morning, then I'll be fast asleep, I can assure you, when that comes out.
No, it's not easy working in this field. You know, you've got to be on your toes. You've got to be ready for anything and everything. Every day brings a new challenge. Ben, it was amazing to have you on the podcast. Thank you once again for giving us your time, and wish you the best for the transfer window and you know, the year ahead. And to all of you guys who've watched the whole podcast, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in on the audio platforms. Make sure to add us to your playlist. It really helps us with the algorithms, as well as subscribe to our channel and follow Ben's social media pages, which are going to be in the description below, as well as our social media pages, to get the latest transfer news and news surrounding football on a daily basis on your mobile screens. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.